The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, they are 17, and for the longest time they have been the center of conversations and discussions, more so in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now, of these discussions, the unfortunate thing about them is 9 out of 10 happen out of boardrooms and conference centers. And it begs the question, when these conversations happen in boardrooms and conference centers, when is this information gonna be dissipated to an everyday person? Someone who wakes up every day and goes to work, someone who wakes up every day and goes to the market and gets supplies, to go and sell in their kiosks or in their small shops. When is this information gonna be made available to kids in school? And just as like the one discovery that I made, just as is the case with many other industries and problems in general, when you're looking for answers, in most cases, the answers usually lie within the problem itself. And in this case, the answer to this question that I'm asking lies within the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the entrepreneurial ecosystem, it has three main pillars: government, academia, and private sector. And when you look at academia, you realize that academia has the right tools, resources, and skills to sort of take this information that has sort of been designed for people in high-level places. They speak that is too technical for an everyday person to understand. Academia can take this information and sort of break it down into chewable, bite-sized pieces of information that can be shared with an everyday person. And if there's one person that understands how this can be done, it's my guest today. Her name is Dr. Mumbi Wachira. She identifies as an educator. She's a lecturer at Strathmore University. And the way that I met her was through a sustainability conference that we had in March. So it gives me so much pleasure to have her on the episode. And even before we get started, I want to say thank you, Mumbi, for being a part of this discussion. Sustainability as a Concept podcast is hosted by Sebastian Davis Ngida. So just to get started, for guys who have never heard about you, seen you, or known what you do, how would you introduce yourself?
Okay, so thank you. So I would introduce myself first and foremost as an educator with a specific focus on accounting and finance, and more specifically, how accounting and finance can help us understand not just the economic value that businesses and different forms of organizations create, but also the non-financial side, which is what ecological and social impacts do their operations have. So that is how I would describe myself, an educator with a specific focus area of interest.
Okay. When you look at a topic like sustainability, and I know this is like an ongoing conversation or a conversation that keeps popping up, people don't necessarily see or know how to tie other fields to sustainability. Like in this case, finance. How like if you have to break it down, how do you tie the two?
So I know sometimes the problem with, again, educators, so all sorts of teachers at whatever level, is that we can get very theoretical with the ideas and then sometimes lose people in the process. So I will try to be as practical as possible.
Yeah.
So with finance, really, it's about thinking about things like capital allocation, or how a business will, finance its operations and the resources it needs to do that. So that's a major function of finance. And who provides this? Mostly the people providing these are banks, the financial institutions, the different sorts of investing companies are providing this capital. So we can think about it this way, with the main focus being that we have to have a win-win. So there's a provider of the capital who gets a return on the investment as a profit, and there's a person who receives it on the demand side, who gets the capital that they need to start their business or to expand it, for example.
Yeah.
Now, if we're to bring in issues of sustainability, we're asking, what, where does this, or rather, what is the final outcome of this funding? So, if I am, again, going back to that chain I've just explained, if I am a financial institution and I am financing a coal producing plant, that's well and good because we still have the economic value created on both sides for the person asking for the capital and the person providing. But then the outcome of that continuous financing of a coal plant is that this coal plant is generating carbon emissions, they're polluting the environment, which then has repercussions for the people who are living outside that coal powered plant and beyond. And this is therefore the problem. When we bring in sustainability ideas into financing, we're asking, what is the outcome of this financing on the broader society and environment? And is it positive or negative? And the difficulty is that when people look at the short term, we can see the immediate profit. And that has been the way business and all forms, most forms of organizations have run. But what we've realized is that the short term leaves out the long term repercussions. And we've realized that the more and more we continue to have a very narrow focus on how the finance is channeled, who it is financing, and what the outcomes are, then we are forgetting the long term effects, which is really that the more you pollute, there are bad outcomes for the community. And we can talk, all day about what those effects look like. But just with that example, if it's a community living there, we're talking about all sorts of health outcomes which are very negative and difficult to treat. So this is what we mean, using that example when we're thinking of sustainability. And just as I try to bring it home, it always helps to start with definitions. So people usually ask, what is sustainability? What does it mean? And then someone says, it means to be sustainable. So
Yeah,
yeah, like, what is this?
yeah.
But I looked, when I was studying this and I still study it, I realized that you have to drill down.
Mm,
And when you drill down, you realize that it's really about asking what is just and fair for the society at large.
mm,
If you ask this question, then it's not just about the coal plant and the bank financing that coal plant.
yeah.
It's about everybody and whether that action is in itself just over time.
Mm, mm. If we move away from what you do now, which is finance, and how you help businesses, and just the entirety of being an educator in the space, as Mumbi Wachira, what is your understanding of what sustainability is?
I think sustainability at a personal level is really thinking about what world do I want to live after I'm gone. So, do I want to live it better? And if so, what does that look like at an individual level? And then, even as I'm thinking about what world I want to live, after I'm gone, I'm also thinking about what world do I want to live in as I'm here?
Mm,
So the moment I ask these kind of questions, then I start, immediately thinking about then what are the challenges? So the challenges are best explained by the SDGs, and we can talk about that. But personally, again, looking at our environment, we're talking about poverty. We're talking about inequalities in our society. We're talking about gender as well and wanting equity. Yeah, we're talking about having spaces that are green and we can all enjoy, not constantly being surrounded by all this concrete and feeling enclosed.
mm.
So the question is, I can't do all this. I'm not Superwoman, although sometimes I say I'm Wonder Woman, but
Yeah.
I'm not able to change all this, but I can do it in a very small way. And I think that then comes to what are the individual choices that I make over and above just being an educator. And I'm happy to expound on those as well.
Yeah. As like you said, like the world you want to live in, how does it look like? Just
Mm.
to sort of live in that utopia for a second, how would you describe that world that you want to live in and leave behind?
Okay, it's a really a very good question and a very interesting one. So I usually, and I'll start from the, the back coming forward.
Mm,
So I've always, from high school, I took art and design up until Form 4. I've always had an artistic side. I paint when I have the time to do so.
yeah,
And I think also because of that, I've always, even till today, when I dream on most nights, my dreams are very colorful.
yeah,
Okay. And often it's of places that I've never really seen. So I tend to imagine the ideal based on that, I guess, ability to think artistically, which is one, a world that where I don't have to breathe in this, polluted air first and foremost, clean air.
yeah,
Then a lot of green spaces for people to just relax and to feel safe and to feel connected with the nature around them. I think of a world where I don't have to keep looking and recognizing always these inequalities that we have. I don't want to live in a world where somebody is asking where they're going to get food, or where somebody is walking naked in town in CBD.
mm,
Near where I live, there's a woman who has been homeless for the better part of 4 years. And I now talk to her often, and I don't, her story is a very sad one, and it's her story to share. But I don't want to see this. I
mm,
want to live in that utopia you're saying, where we have actually addressed those major challenges. There's enough food, there's enough water, we're using clean energy, we have green spaces, we have time, we're not overworked. I feel like we're also overworked. We wake up at 4 a.m., I'm hearing somebody in heels going
mm,
to get a matatu.
yeah.
Is that what life is?
And
So
kids waiting for school buses at 5 a.m.
yeah, is this what it should be like? And I think, when I was listening to this podcast recently from a researcher and educator who I really admire called Brené Brown.
Mm,
And the guest was talking about human beings are always yearning for a utopia. Naturally, that is our inclination, and
yeah,
it's rooted deep within. And I'm not a philosopher, but I remember we did 1 or 2 units in philosophy, and there was always that understanding that we yearn for that perfection. And this is what I sometimes keep thinking of, and why I have never been able to turn away from these problems. And that
yeah.
has defined my path.
Oh, okay. I like that you mentioned having an artistic side, because then it makes me want to ask, like, because for most people, especially artists, and this is just common narrative in the creative industry and creative economy. Most people who are inclined to art don't necessarily get the support. But I like that you said that you started this when you're in high school. So, if I may ask, if it's not too personal,
Please
where
do.
did you go to high school? Where is your family from? And the icing
Okay.
to that will be, when did you first say, okay, I'm gonna start doing something in the sustainability space?
Okay. I think you have really good questions, Sebastian.
Thank you.
So okay, fine. I'll start from primary. So in primary, I went to Consolata. I It was there. I think all along, I always used to have these like things I would draw for
Mm,
my parents. I would draw pictures of girls, or pictures of dresses and flowers. So I would always, share these things with them, and they tried to encourage me to. to continue with it.
Mm.
So I did that. Then I went in high school, I went to St. George's Girls. So if someone is listening here from St. Jean, wow.
Yeah.
So I went there and I chose art and design because I was good at it. At the time, I was thinking, let me do something I'm good at. But I also really liked it. I never struggled with it. You know, I would be told, draw this or paint this, and I'll just do it. And I was also in a class where people had immense talent, and I was constantly inspired by them as well.
Yeah.
So I did that, then finished. So now, as finalizing, there's this question of, okay, what are you going to do in university? And I had no idea. You know, I really didn't have any idea of what to do.
Mm.
And I finished, so we are there. I took a bit of a break as I'm waiting to see what's happening. Studied Chinese for a bit, a few months.
Mm.
Then, when eventually, I think after talking to a few people, and especially my dad, he said, since you're not so sure, why don't you just do a BCom? And I hear Strathmore is offering one, and it's a good university. And at
Yeah.
the time, I didn't want, because I was like, no, I think USIU will be interesting. So there was that bit back and forth. But eventually I came and I really enjoyed it. And now, where does this interest in sustainability come?
Yeah.
So it came because as I was doing my BCom, again, I used the mentality of, let me do what I'm good in. So when I looked at my transcripts, I realized that most of the accounting units I did very well. Same for finance.
Yeah.
So I said, let me just do this because it seems I'm good at this. But then we had to do a research project in our fourth year. And again, I was stuck. What do I want to do? I don't really feel like doing something to do with auditing or financial reporting. And again, after talking to people, I realized, why not do research on green businesses? I really didn't know what a green business was.
Mm.
I'd just, forwarded some things on you, like the UNEP had written about green jobs in Kenya.
Yeah.
And then it came like the rabbit hole that Alice followed into that other world. That now I realized, wait, there are all these challenges which are ecological, and businesses address them through their business model. And I talked to different manufacturing companies in industrial area, spent a lot of time there, going to different recycling plants, going to different, I guess, even businesses that were thinking about their occupational health and safety. And then it just became something that I, I don't know what to say, but I just became very passionate about this, understanding that there's an intersection between businesses and the way they interact with the society and the wider environment. So
Yeah.
I've never looked back from that.
Baptism by fire. You sort of found yourself in that space. Yeah. When you're working with businesses,
Yes.
and these are two-part question. What would you say, especially for the early adapters, what
Yeah.
is it that they're looking for when they finally say, okay, I need to start thinking of how this business can be sustainable, and like the common denominators among the early adapters, and the other thing would be, what would you say is the common misconception when it comes to sustainability, especially when
Okay.
businesses are concerned?
Right. So let me go to the first one. What I have found with those who want to start, and I'd rather, I am also cognizant that we have a spectrum. So most of the businesses I have interacted with are SMEs, but there are also some large organizations that have said, look, we want to have a sustainability strategy. What are some of the things that we can think about?
Yeah.
So I think usually what will happen with, I would say, the large companies and also to some extent the small ones is that there's someone in leadership who has been again woken up like I have. So
Yeah.
sometimes I usually think it's like the Matrix for those who have watched it, when the guy wakes up new and he realizes this world is fake.
Yeah.
Like is actually what the real world is. So it's like they wake up and they're like very eager to see how are we going to think about our sustainability across the business.
Yeah.
So they are those ones who are very clear, and it's usually most of the time it's someone in leadership. There are some areas or some, I would say, situations where it is someone who isn't in leadership, maybe middle management or the front line, who again also has that kumbaya moment, if that's
Yeah.
the right way to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
Then they want to find out, how can I pitch this to the board? How can I pitch this to the CEO?
Yeah.
So I've seen both. And I think their motivation is just realizing that these problems are real, they are interconnected, and there are solutions that businesses can build around them. And even if they don't build solutions to them, they can at least not make the problems worse.
Yeah.
So that is what tends to drive them. Now, the misconception is that this is something you do as an addition. So it has also come out in my research very strongly that businesses tend to, and this is across the world mostly, it's not just here,
Yeah.
that businesses will think of this like this is an add-on. It's something that we do separately, but we are still here like quarter to quarter to quarter. What's happening? What is the bottom line, and so on. But people have not understood this thing clearly, and I think there's also room for researchers and other educators to demonstrate this more concretely and specifically, that the long term is tied with the short term. So, whereas your short term goals are built around profit maximization, you actually, if you take care of the other dimensions, you're looking at the environmental impact of the business, you're looking at the social dimension of the business, you're taking care of that and looking at performance holistically, then you find that actually overall performance improves over time. But some investment is needed at the beginning. So people sometimes think of these things as separately. And to be fair, I'll also say for an SME, there are immediate pressures they have. Yeah, they need people need to be paid. You
Yeah.
see, bills, water bills are not changing, energy bills are not changing. So when you're telling somebody that this is yet another thing you have to think about and integrate, it's quite a lot of work. And that's why sometimes people think of them in a dichotomy rather than in an interconnected way.
Yeah. Well, when sort of researching on these conversations, the one thing that keeps coming up is corporate sustainability. Um, there's CSR and CSV. Um, if you don't mind, could you please sort of break that down? Because sometimes when you tell people let's do something on sustainability, they're like, that's not a CSR project. So what is the difference between those two?
That's also a very good question. So I think that the problem has been that the areas have emerged all at once, and sometimes it's very difficult to separate. Is what we are doing CSR or is it corporate sustainability? When does it become shared value?
Yeah.
So let me start with CSR because that's the one that a lot of people can resonate with. CSR is old, it's from actually the 50s. Yeah, and even beyond. I think even when I was studying, I realized this thing even goes back to the 1300s in the US and in Britain. It's that thing where you say, okay, we are here, we are doing our work as a business, but we're aware that there are other problems which are occurring around us and we can help. So if you think mostly in terms of doing something extra, yeah. So, for example, now what Safaricom is doing with sending food
Yeah.
to different parts of the country,
Yeah.
that would be part of CSR. It is corporate social responsibility that you're realizing that just the way you do at an individual level, you have your job and the things that you do every day, but then you also give things in church, you help your family out where you can. These things that you're not compelled to do, it is not necessarily the core of what you do on a day-to-day basis, but it is channeling help towards people who need it, but it is not related most times to the core of what the business does.
Yeah.
This is something separate.
Okay.
Now, sustainability is where, and sometimes we call this ESG, so ecological, social governance issues. This is where you are looking at the organization from the top to the bottom and all across inside. And you're mostly asking questions around. If I start with the ecological side, I'm asking, okay, what is our impact? So you start thinking about the energy we use. For example, in Strathmore, we actually replaced, we completely run on solar power now. So if we, say, is it actually efficient to continue using this type of energy, or should we transition now to solar power? Then you start seeing what are the efficiency gains there. Then you're asking yourself, our waste, how are we disposing of it? Our water, is there an opportunity to recycle? So you ask those kind of questions and you start to make those changes.
Yeah.
And on the social side, you're asking yourself things like, okay, internally, how are we treating our employees? Are they paid fairly? Are they working in a safe environment? What are the benefits that we give them? Do they have an opportunity to, even own part of the company? There was an interesting one I had from an SME, a very small one, but she said at the basic, even if I can't give them much, I'm just giving them health insurance. If they want, this can be purchased. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's now sustainability. You're looking through the organization and trying to put in or trying to understand what is your ecological social impact and can you improve that over time.
Yes.
Now, shared value is where you are saying, okay, there are all these problems around us. And as I always say, if people don't know how to see the problems, although that this is more for an outside, audience, not a Kenyan audience,
Yeah.
but just, use the SDGs as a frame, then you're asking, okay, there's an issue to do with food security. There's an issue to do with financial inclusion. There's an issue to do with gender-based violence, for example. Now, what is our business strategy? And can we craft a strategy that addresses this problem sustainably and profitably? So usually, people use, and we can talk about it further. But if we think of M-Pesa and how it started, that is actually a shared value strategy because the problem is financial inclusion.
Yeah.
Before we have to travel, taking money to our grandparents, our parents, it's difficult. Sometimes the bank accounts are not there. But they craft a solution around it that addresses this problem. And now this is the largest part of their business, you see.
Yeah.
So that's what shared value is. You're addressing a social problem and you are addressing it in a way that is linked to your business model.
Yes.
That's what shared value is.
All right. So for companies and SMEs that are sort of getting into the space or are already in the space, the one thing that I've noticed is happening is the reporting aspect of sustainability activities that they're doing. So why is corporate sustainability reporting important?
So another good question. So I think, as people who have done accounting, we're always saying what gets measured gets managed, and sometimes someone will say, really? But it's true, yeah?
Yes,
It
yes.
gives accountability, transparency to what you're doing. Now, what I'd like to just acknowledge right now is that I know there is complexity to sustainability reporting. The complexity is for many reasons. The first is that there are many reporting standards. So you find there's a global reporting initiative, there's that standard, there's what we call SASB, there's one that focuses on climate disclosure. So when someone is starting, it can look overwhelming.
Yes.
And that's usually one major issue. But what I would say is it's always good to start from somewhere and then build. And recognize that increasingly it's becoming more and more important to actually demonstrate how do you actually account for your impact on society and the environment. So you may not have a system to say measure your carbon emissions, but you can have a system that captures, how much paper are we actually saving? Do we need, I was recently talking to someone and they said they know a business where people still print emails. Is that necessary? You see,
Yeah.
so you can have ways of capturing this, and then with time you get better at it. Even if it's just saying, what is our policy around even gender diversity if we have one, or even just diversity in general. What about our pay? When we talk about fair pay, what is our policy on that? And then you put the policy and you live by it. So it's you start small, then you build, but increasingly there's an expectation. Actually, I was just last year, I think the NSC now released an ESG disclosure guidance document. Banks are also now being required to think about their climate risk and report on the same. The central bank is going to require this of them.
Yeah.
If you want linkages to regional and international markets, even as an SME, and we're talking about benefiting from that Africa continental free trade area, then these are things that, or rather disclosures, which other businesses, other organizations that you want to work with, or even to seek funding from, will expect. And it will still differentiate you from those who are not doing this. So why not start?
Yeah. And so, what are some of the sort of emerging? Because you've mentioned there are a couple of models to use when you're doing the reporting. So, what are some of the practices or trends that are emerging for sustainability reporting?
In terms of the frameworks.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I would say that the one that is the most, I would say, recognized one and globally is what we call the Global Reporting Initiative. The
Okay.
Global Reporting Initiative has been there, I think, since even before 2000. And they've been looking at this issue. What are the governance disclosures you need to think about? Even the economic disclosures that you need to think about. Then they also have the social and the environmental ones that you can think about, and the ones which are material or not as material. So they give you kind of a structured way in which you can start thinking about your reporting process. Now, that is for large organizations. For the small ones, what I would suggest is that you look at some of the tools available for SMEs. For example, we have an organization here called B Lab. B Lab East Africa. I think they're actually becoming B Lab Africa soon. And they have tools that one can use to actually start at whatever level they are at the baseline, capturing those disclosures over time. So there's one called the SDG Action Manager, and there's also another one called B Impact Assessment. And there's so much material, and all these things are free. And there's so much material about just guidance. How do you get started? What do you need to do? How do these tools work? Those are the ones I would recommend. There are several others. I think the important thing is pick one. You know,
Yeah.
there's also there's also one more I'd like to add, which is what we call the integrated reporting, the International Integrated Reporting Framework. So that one can also be considered by larger firms, but I still keep seeing that the focus is primarily on let's get this sustainability reporting framework correct, and let's use guidances and or guidelines and frameworks that have been tried and tested over time.
Yeah.
So those are the recommendations I would provide.
All right. As a newbie in the space, I'm curious to learn what are some of the common trends that you're seeing, especially with SMEs when it comes to sustainability, like the ones who are just getting in, or even the ones that are already in there and they're doing something about it. Yes, we know the tree planting thing that comes up once in a while for most companies.
Yeah.
And I also feel like that happens because a lot of individuals just do it because it's a cool thing to do. And they don't necessarily understand what the entirety of the sustainability concept is. But besides the tree planting aspect, what are some of the emerging trends that SMEs are doing, and even the corporates? What are some of the things they're doing?
Okay, good, very good questions. You know, yesterday we actually had the vice president of economic affairs and private sector development from the IFC visiting the university,
Yeah.
and we discussed some of these things. You know, what are the trends, and what I think I'm seeing some interest in among SMEs is around this idea of the circular economy. So the circular economy is really about, rather than having making products just from one end to another. So I make a product, it is used by a consumer and then disposed of. If we think especially with the plastics problem, yeah, that we have huge landfills in Dandora, you know, how do we then reuse this waste? And can we create businesses that either recycle that waste or either think through the product design?
Yeah.
So there are some businesses looking at this space. And I think my feeling is that there's a lot of financing opportunities there because waste is becoming almost a problem that is not being managed very well locally.
Yes.
Um, and the typical SME, because we've trained quite a number, the typical SME is still thinking about, I would say they're still at that sustainability stage
Yeah.
where they're thinking about the efficiencies, as we were saying. How do we just make these things flow better? You know, how do we just minimize our impact? Most of them are thinking like that, and then they are using some of those tools that I've mentioned, or even others at a very preliminary phase.
Yeah.
I also think that, you know, I think we have to move away from this thing of tree planting just for the sake. I think we need to think about, you see, and this maybe also goes now to larger companies now.
Yes.
So we can go and plant trees in the mall, that's fine. But actually, in Strathmore, we have one of our professors who has said and is working with local communities there because she's realized that, you know, we can benefit from these trees because there are things we call carbon markets. So if actually you grow trees that meet the specifications of what carbon markets require, you can actually earn money from that. Yeah. But of course, you need to have a system in place to make sure that the tree meets those specifications and you yourself qualify to participate in the carbon market. And then you give it time because it does need to grow and all this. But people are also looking at these opportunities like, what can we do to trap carbon in the atmosphere and how can we benefit from this through the carbon markets? So this is something that larger organizations can also look at. Then I think when it comes to financial institutions, now the big banks, insurers, there's a lot of attention on, again, going back to that very first example I said, the financing you have, who are you financing? So one of the things I even teach in some of my classes is around how do we make the portfolio a sustainable one? So there are some industries where we want to see over time divestment in because at their very core, they are polluting industries. And you should rather start channeling the investments towards green businesses or green solution.
Yeah.
So there is that focus about the portfolio of banks and how they are then restructuring it so that the capital flows tend to support those businesses that we're talking about that are bringing solutions to these problems around climate change and the
Yeah.
other SDGs as well.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the carbon markets because when you look at EV-driven companies, electric vehicle-driven companies,
Oh, yes.
the one thing they keep putting out there, it's as if their business model depends on it, is how much carbon credits they have. And it's
Yes.
okay to also understand that with every predicament, there's a business opportunity that comes with it. And in this case, guys have realized, you know what, we can also make money from carbon credits, which is fine as long as you're actually doing what you're saying you're doing.
Exactly.
So yeah, so when it comes to such concepts where guys are now innovating around this predicament that we have of carbon emissions and just making sure that we are doing something about sustainability in our businesses, what will be your take on that?
Um, so like how to encourage people to, I guess, be more innovative in building these solutions and incentivized. Is that the correct way to you want me to answer?
It's more of an opinion. There's a predicament that is happening.
Yes.
What is your opinion about people saying, okay, we're gonna build business models around this predicament and make money off of it?
Oh, good. I'm even happy you've asked this because I remember there's a time in 20, wait, when was it? It was before COVID. In 2019, we did research with an organization called the Shared Value Africa Initiative, which
Yeah.
supports businesses that want to implement shared value. It's a very good organization. And I spent some time, interviewing different businesses, large and small, in Kenya and in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I also asked this question like, so there are two different ways of looking at it. There's that business side, then there's also what we call, maybe, I don't know that the right thing is a philosophical side. So let me start with the philosophical one, which is we are making money out of a problem.
Yeah.
Is that, again, going back to justice, is that just? Is there a risk in that? And you find that, again, because of being an academic, you always have to find, as much as you support something, you have to critique it as well. And there are people who have critiqued shared value for this. Because the thing is, when the problem stops being profitable, do you then withdraw? So then but the problem is still there.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. Then the second question is like, is business the right mechanism to actually address deeply embedded social problems? And I remember there was a man who I interviewed, and he said, this is the work of government. Our business is purely to make money and to profit. Government gives us the environment and they take care of the society and the ecology. This is not our responsibility. So, yes, I've seen their tensions. There are tensions between managing the conventional short term thinking that business has adopted and sometimes must adopt. And then these problems that again tend to be very complex of a long term nature and will still continue to exist whether or not the business model around them is a profitable one. So, that one, there's no easy answer. I think what we do need, and I've had this from a professor called Professor Mariana Mazzucato,
Yeah.
who says that what we need is a mission. She calls it a mission economy, where we have more collaborations between government, business, and society so that you close some of those loops or those gaps around addressing these problems. But it's complex. In terms of the business side of it, I think I would rather say let us support business innovation because I tend to think, I mean, even if you're just looking at our growth trajectory on this continent and the problems that we have, I was listening to, I don't know how many years, like hundreds of years it will take for us to have like an equitable healthcare system. So you know that if we go the conventional route, we're not going to get there. But some of the ways this can be bridged is through business innovation around these grand challenges that we keep saying. So I would support it, but there needs to be a way to, I don't want to say immediately to regulate, but to find ways in which we keep checks and balances so we don't have again, businesses coming and unfortunately, taking advantage of the situation because there are real repercussions on people's lives and their well-being as well.
Yeah. Because also
Yeah,
the risk with that is if I'm profiting from the problem, then I'm more inclined towards ensuring that problem persists as opposed to
exactly.
having it solved.
Exactly. This is the tension.
Yeah.
And I think, as you've said, I mean, even that tension goes further at the macro level because you find it's coming because of this thing between you see, even now when we talk about development, we want the economy to grow, to develop. We want to have these things that will make us thrive. But for us to have these things, we have to do or make some decisions which in the short term are not sustainable. Yeah. So that's usually the tension. And that's where you find that sometimes people, especially in developing countries, we are always like, this, let us first grow, then we will look at sustainability,
Yeah. Yeah.
But then now what we're trying to do is a very difficult thing where we're trying to do both together. And that's where the tensions are now coming.
Yes. I like that you mentioned this guy that was like, this whole concept is government responsibility. And
Yes.
it just brings in an element of individual responsibility. I remember after our conference, someone sent me a DM on Instagram. And he was like, I was in a matatu and I had just eaten a snack. And my first instinct was to throw the wrapper out the window. But by the simple fact that I had come from this event and I'd heard people talk about this thing, the next thing that I did was to put it in my pocket, and I even felt guilty throwing it anywhere. I went straight home with it. And that just brings in an element of how then do we have more conversations. And because
Yeah.
when you start researching on sustainability, the thing I've realized is there are actually conversations that are already existing. It's only that they're not mainstream. I've seen a number of sustainability podcasts. I've seen a number of articles, but it seems like the quote unquote, if you know, you know. Like if you're in that space, you'll know about these spaces where people talk about these things. So, how do we make this conversation mainstream enough
Yeah.
so that we also promote individual responsibility when it comes to sustainability?
Thank you for that question. Also, a very important one. I think, awareness is a big thing. Yeah. And then how the way in which we make people aware is also important, and the language we use. So I find that, you see, a lot of people now know of the activist Greta Thunberg, who
Yes.
is British. And she started striking every Friday until she caught the attention of the news outlets. And this took her some time. And then what I remember her saying early on in one of her speeches is that why, when she realized there's a problem, so she realized it again, she's very smart. So she realized that, wait, you look at the report that the IPCC is the body that monitors, global temperatures and the resulting effects of climate change over time. And she was reading these reports, and every year they were becoming more and more dire.
Yeah.
And she said, but this is an emergency. Why aren't people talking about this? And she was saying, why isn't it coming every day on the news?
Yeah.
Because you watch news, but you don't see this being talked about. And I think that's one challenge, that in terms of the reach, who has the reach? So the institutions that have the reach is the media, one institution. I think also universities have reach, schools have reach.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we must do, I think much more urgently, if I can even emphasize it like that,
Yeah.
is just talk about it, raise awareness, embed these topics in the curriculum. It is a conversation we're even having here. Strathmore is a member of what we call the Principles for Responsible Management Education.
Mm.
This initiative is really about how are we going to change the curriculum so that someone who is studying economics understands issues to do with sustainable development and what we call the ecological and social externalities, not just the economic side of things. How are we going to make sure that someone who is doing political science understands how to make climate negotiations?
Yeah.
How are we going to do it? So it's us to do it. And I think also, finally, I mean, a large part of it is also the political will to make it happen. But I keep thinking that we must go to those people who are really, as I keep saying, it's us, who can reach huge masses of people, and raise awareness there. And I think that there's power in also those who have standing in society. You know, you can look at Wangari Maathai, and she inspired an entire movement,
Yes.
you know. So I think there are some people who can make people sit up. Even Leonardo DiCaprio, you know, when he started talking about it, all of a sudden people said, oh,
Yeah.
wait,
Yeah.
what climate change? Then
Mm.
now they go to check. So probably it's just identifying also who are these celebrities, even local ones, who can draw in huge crowds and bring them on board. Then we can work with the other institutions that we have, that can also support this. But I think let's look for the ones who have reach. Then we make people aware at that level. Because I don't think, you know, when people throw the trash outside and we get so irritated,
Mm.
not that they are evil, you know, it's not that somebody they're laughing diabolically, have, you know,
Yeah.
it's awareness and thinking about when I throw it like this, where is it going to end up?
Mm.
And then now that's where the change can happen.
Yeah.
And I'll throw one last controversial one. You know, one of the one of the behavioral changes that people have talked about is meat production. You
Yeah.
know, the meat is correlated with high levels of emissions as well, especially methane. And one of the questions has been around, can we then encourage more of a plant-based diet?
Mm.
Um, I don't, you know, I think it's just starting to have these conversations. I'm not saying that now we don't eat chicken, because I personally eat chicken. I'm not saying I'm a vegetarian either,
Yeah.
but just understanding that what are some of those small things I can do, but also recognizing that the grand level changes will be driven by governments and businesses. That
Mm.
is also my view.
Yeah. Us guys who are now positioning ourselves as a sustainability media platform, what would be the one thing that you'd want for us not to miss?
Wow, that's a good question again. The one thing I would not want you to miss, I think people need to know the facts. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people need to know the facts, and where can the facts be found? So the facts, you know, one of the things that I do in my classes is that I show them a heat map that NASA usually has from the 1800s until now. And what you see over time is the way the temperatures have risen extensively in the last 30 years.
Yes.
And that usually evokes something, because
Mm.
now they understand that, wait, you're telling me it's this hot. And you are like, yes, it is. And then after that, I showed them this is the effect in picture form.
Yeah.
So I think not to scare people, but let them understand the facts in a way they will appreciate. And I think sometimes we as, again, people who are in academia don't know how to do that, because we get very bogged in with the, you know, the IPCC report on climate change. Someone is now wondering, how is this calculated? It's very abstract sometimes.
Mm.
But when you see, you know, if I teach climate risk for insurers and I show them a place in California that houses have completely been burnt because of wildfires, and I ask them, what is the cost of that for insurers?
Mm.
Then it's home.
Yeah.
So I think using tools like this, which you have the expertise in, to relay these facts that there is global warming, it causes climate change, and these are some of the effects. And this is what they look like locally. Then it's home. Just like the way when, as we are now having a drought, when we see people without food and dead animals, it hits something. But let people also understand this is not just a random thing. This is climate change. It will continue to worsen over time. So we then need to build ways to sustain ourselves and, help these people. Otherwise, it's going to bite us all in the future.
So the last question is, if you were to wake up one day as one of the SDGs, which one will it be?
Sebastian, I need to read about these questions. How do you find these very interesting and engaging questions?
It's just conversation. I have nothing written on my end.
They are good.
Thank you.
I think number 10, reduced inequalities. As I said at the very beginning, I've always been sharply aware of the, just the inequalities that are present around me. Why is it that some have and others don't? This is just an accident of birth. It is not something special that one person did. The other person, it's just, lack, opportunity, serendipity, whatever we want to call it. So this is something that, for me, I keep thinking about so much. So it's definitely number 10. And it also intersects with other issues around the way we treat people with disabilities, how we also treat sometimes women, although I'm happy to see that in Kenya we seem to be, also improving there. But overall, for me, it is the class difference that why is it like this and what can we do to bridge those gaps for Kenya?
All right. Thank you, Mumbi.
Thank you so much.
It's been an amazing session. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity, Sebastian. I'm really looking forward to it.
Okay, so you guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Like I told you at the beginning, I knew this episode was going to be knowledgeable, and I hope that it has been for you. So if you have any sort of feedback that you'd like to give us, make sure to comment in the comment section. But if you are watching this on YouTube or listening to this on YouTube, ensure to hit the subscribe button and give us a follow. I'm going to leave all the necessary social media links in the comment section. My name is Sebastian. Karibu sana, and I'll see you in the next episode.